Chapter 1. A Small Town Boy. Ronald Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. Tampico was a tiny town with just a few streets and fewer than 1,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Life was simple, but it wasn't easy. The Reagan family lived in a small apartment above a store. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Ronald's father, Jack Reagan, was a shoe salesman. Jack was a lively man with a big personality. He loved to tell jokes and stories that made people laugh. But Jack had a problem. He drank too much. This sometimes made life hard for the family. Ronald's mother, Nell, was the opposite of Jack. She was kind, calm, and strong. She loved to help others and often volunteered at church. She believed that every person had the power to do good in the world. Ronald had an older brother, Neil, who everyone called Moon. The two brothers were close, and they spent hours playing together. But Ronald, or Dutch as everyone called him, had a special spark. He got the nickname Dutch because his father said he looked like a little Dutchman when he was a baby. The name stuck. Dutch had a wild imagination. He loved to tell stories, just like his father. He also loved adventure. One winter, when he was just 9 years old, Dutch saved his brother from falling through thin ice on a frozen river. The ice cracked under Neil's feet, and he started to sink. Without thinking, Dutch grabbed a long branch and pulled his brother to safety. It was a brave moment for such a young boy, but that was Dutch, always ready to help. Growing up in Tampico during the early 1900s wasn't easy. The Reagan family didn't have much money. Some days, there wasn't enough food on the table. Ronald's father moved the family from one small town to another, always looking for better work. They lived in Dixon, Illinois, for much of Ronald's childhood. Dixon was bigger than Tampico, but it was still a quiet, rural town. Despite the hardships, there was joy in Dutch's childhood. He loved playing sports, especially football. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he had determination. "I never quit," he once said. Dutch also loved swimming in the Rock River near Dixon. In the summer, he worked as a lifeguard, keeping people safe. It was a job he took very seriously. By the time he was 22, Dutch had saved 77 lives from the river. Each rescue was a moment of courage that shaped the man he would become. At school, Dutch was an average student, but he shone in other ways. He was friendly, confident, and funny. He loved to act in school plays and perform in front of people. His classmates liked him, and teachers noticed his leadership. Even as a young boy, Dutch had a way of making people feel good about themselves. But life wasn't always happy. The Reagan family faced hard times during the Great Depression. This was a period when many people in America lost their jobs and homes. Dutch saw his parents struggle to pay bills. He watched his father lose job after job because of his drinking. These moments were tough for young Ronald, but they taught him something important. He learned to work hard, stay hopeful, and believe that things could get better. Nell played a big role in shaping Dutch's character. She taught him to care about others and to stay positive, even in hard times. One of her favorite sayings was, "There's always a bright side." Dutch believed this. He believed that if you worked hard and stayed optimistic, you could achieve great things. These lessons stayed with him for the rest of his life. Dutch also loved movies. In those days, movies were magical. They were black and white, with big stars like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Dutch would sit in the theater, eyes wide, dreaming of faraway places and exciting adventures. He didn't know it then, but one day he would be on that big screen too. One day, when Dutch was just 11 years old, something happened that he would never forget. His father came home late one night in the middle of winter. Jack had been drinking and collapsed on the front porch. Dutch found him there, shivering in the cold. He helped his father inside, wrapped him in blankets, and sat with him until he warmed up. It was a painful moment, but it showed Dutch's compassion and strength, even at a young age. Despite the struggles, Dutch never gave up on his dreams. He wanted more than the small-town life of Tampico or Dixon. He wanted to see the world and make a difference. But how could a boy from such a small place ever do something big? That question stayed with him as he grew older. Dutch's childhood was a mix of joy and hardship, laughter and tears. It was a time that shaped his character and prepared him for the challenges ahead. He learned to work hard, care for others, and believe in himself. These lessons would guide him in ways he could never imagine. As Dutch grew, so did his dreams. Would this small-town boy from Illinois find a way to change the world? The answer, as we'll discover, was yes, in ways no one could have predicted. Chapter 2: Hard Times and Big Dreams. The Great Depression began in 1929. It was a time of fear and struggle for millions of Americans. Factories closed, banks failed, and jobs disappeared. The Reagan family was not spared. They had little money and often moved from one place to another, hoping for better opportunities. Ronald, or Dutch, as everyone called him, was still a boy when the hard times began. He saw his parents worry about paying bills. He noticed when there wasn't enough food on the table. Some days, he wore clothes that were patched and worn. But Dutch didn't complain. He learned to make the best of what he had. Jack Reagan, Ronald's father, worked as a salesman. He was charming and friendly, with a gift for talking to people. But Jack had a problem: alcohol. On good days, he was the life of the party. On bad days, he drank too much and lost control. This brought sadness and shame to the family. Dutch loved his father, but he also saw the damage alcohol caused. It hurt to see someone he admired struggle so much. Nell, Dutch's mother, was the heart of the family. She never gave up hope, even in the darkest times. Nell was deeply religious and believed in kindness above all else. She spent her time helping others, even when her own family was in need. She often told Dutch, "It's not what happens to you in life that matters. It's how you react to it." These words stayed with him. To help the family, Dutch started working when he was still a boy. He mowed lawns, delivered groceries, and took any small jobs he could find. He was proud to contribute, even in small ways. Dutch learned the value of hard work early in life. He didn't mind long hours or tough tasks. Each job taught him responsibility and discipline. These lessons would shape him for years to come. Despite the challenges, Dutch always dreamed big. He loved movies and imagined himself in exciting adventures. Sometimes, after finishing his chores, he would sit by the radio and listen to shows about heroes, cowboys, and explorers. His imagination soared. He wondered, could I ever be a hero like them? Dutch also loved sports. Football was his favorite. He wasn't the biggest or strongest player, but he had heart. On the field, he gave everything he had. Coaches noticed his determination and praised his teamwork. Dutch may not be a star, one coach said, but he never gives up. Sports taught him about perseverance, leadership, and working with others, qualities that would serve him well later in life. School was another important part of Dutch's life. He wasn't a top student, but he worked hard and showed great potential. Teachers liked him because he was respectful and eager to learn. Dutch also had a talent for acting. He loved performing in school plays and making his classmates laugh. On stage, he felt free. He could become anyone he wanted, a prince, a cowboy, even a hero. One winter, Dutch faced a moment that would stay with him forever. The Reagan family had little money for heating their home. The cold seeped through the walls, and Dutch could see his breath indoors. But he didn't complain. Instead, he grabbed extra blankets, made sure his brother was warm, and quietly endured the discomfort. His resilience impressed everyone around him. Dutch was becoming a young man with a strong sense of responsibility and compassion. The Great Depression also brought moments of deep sadness. Dutch saw families lose their homes. He watched neighbors line up at soup kitchens, hoping for a meal. Sometimes he heard his parents argue late at night, their voices filled with worry. It was a heavy burden for a young boy to carry. But Dutch refused to lose hope. He believed that better days would come. Nell played a key role in keeping the family's spirits high. She often read inspiring stories from the Bible or shared tales of people who had overcome hardships. One of Dutch's favorite stories was about a man who helped others despite his own struggles. It reminded him of his mother's selflessness. These stories planted seeds of optimism in Dutch's heart. He started to believe that no matter how hard life seemed, he could make a difference. One day, when Dutch was about 15, he saw his father drunk in public. It was a painful moment. Dutch wanted to help his father, but he didn't know how. Instead of getting angry, he made a promise to himself. He would never let alcohol control his life. He wanted to be strong, reliable, and someone others could depend on. This promise became part of who he was. By the time Dutch was in high school, his dreams were growing. He didn't want to stay in a small town forever. He wanted to see the world and do something meaningful. But how? Dutch didn't have an answer yet. but he knew he would find one. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You can't control what life gives you, but you can control how you respond. He decided to face every challenge with courage and determination. The Great Depression was a hard time for the Reagan family, but it shaped Dutch in powerful ways. He learned to work hard, stay positive, and care for others. He saw the pain that addiction could bring and vowed to live a life of discipline and purpose. He dreamed of a future where he could help people and make the world a better place. Little did Dutch know, his journey was just beginning. Could this boy, raised in hard times, really make a difference? The answer was closer than he thought. Chapter 3. The Voice of a Star. Ronald Reagan loved sports. As a boy, he spent hours playing football, basketball, and swimming in the Rock River. But more than playing, he loved watching and listening to sports. In those days, there was no television, only radio. Ronald would sit close to the radio and listen as announcers described every move, every score, and every exciting moment. He loved how their voices brought the games to life. After high school, Ronald went to Eureka College in Illinois. He studied economics and sociology, but spent much of his time on the football field and performing in school plays. He was a natural storyteller and performer, and his friends noticed something special about him. He had a voice that stood out, clear, warm, and full of energy. When Ronald graduated in 1932, the Great Depression was still making life hard for many Americans. Jobs were scarce, and Ronald had to think creatively about his future. He dreamed of becoming an actor, but that seemed far away. First, he needed a job. Any job. One day, he heard about a radio station looking for a sports announcer. The job was in Davenport, Iowa, at a station called WAC. Ronald was excited but nervous. He had no experience as a radio announcer, but he had confidence in his voice and his passion for sports. He traveled to the station and asked for an audition. The manager handed him a piece of paper and said, "Describe a football game." Ronald looked at the paper. It was blank. There was no game to describe. He would have to make one up on the spot. Ronald closed his eyes and imagined a football field. He saw the players running, the crowd cheering, the ball flying through the air. Then he began to speak. His words flowed naturally, painting a vivid picture of an exciting game. He described every detail as if it were happening right in front of him. When he finished, the manager smiled and said, "You're hired." Ronald couldn't believe it. He had landed his first job. It paid $10 a week, a small amount, but it was a start. He was now a sports announcer. At first, Ronald covered local games. He worked hard to learn the skills of a good broadcaster. He practiced speaking clearly and with energy. He studied players and teams so he could share interesting stories during his broadcasts. Listeners loved his enthusiasm. When Ronald described a game, they felt like they were sitting in the stands, watching every play. Soon, Ronald got a bigger opportunity. He was asked to announce games for the Chicago Cubs baseball team. But there was a catch. The games weren't live. Ronald would sit in the radio studio with a sheet of paper that showed only the basic details: strikes, balls, and runs. He had to use his imagination to fill in the rest. For example, if the paper said, home run, Ronald didn't just say, it's a home run. Instead, he would say something like, the pitcher winds up, he throws, the batter swings, crack, the ball flies high into the air. It's going, gone, home run. His storytelling brought the games to life, and listeners loved it. One day, something dramatic happened during a broadcast. Ronald was announcing a Cubs game when the wire delivering the game updates suddenly stopped working. There was no information about what was happening on the field. Ronald didn't panic. Instead, he made up the next part of the game. He described a long, tense at-bat, with the batter fouling off pitch after pitch. By the time the wire was working again, the batter had hit a single, and the game continued smoothly. The listeners never knew the difference. Ronald's talent for storytelling made him a favorite among sports fans. People began to recognize his voice, and his broadcasts brought joy to those listening during tough times. He loved his work, but deep down, he still dreamed of something more. He wanted to act, to be on the big screen. Could his voice take him there? In 1937, Ronald got his chance. While traveling with the Chicago Cubs for spring training in California, he decided to visit a friend who worked in Hollywood. This friend introduced Ronald to a talent agent. The agent was impressed by Ronald's charm and good looks. "You should take a screen test," the agent said. A screen test was a short film used to see if someone had what it took to be in movies. Ronald agreed and gave the test his best effort. A few weeks later, he got amazing news. Warner Brothers Studio wanted to sign him as an actor. He was offered a 7-year contract, something many people in Hollywood only dreamed of. Ronald was thrilled. His time as a radio announcer had opened the door to a whole new world. Before he left for Hollywood, Ronald looked back on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought about his first audition at WOC, the blank piece of paper, and the games he had made come alive with his words. He thought about the long nights in the studio, imagining games for fans who couldn't be there in person. Each step had taught him something important: hard work, creativity, and the power of storytelling. Now, he was ready for the next chapter. Could this small-town boy with a golden voice make it in Hollywood? Only time would tell. Chapter 4. Hollywood Calls. In 1937, Ronald Reagan's life changed forever. The young radio announcer from Illinois, who had brought sports games to life with his voice, now stood on the edge of a new adventure. Hollywood had called, and Ronald was ready to answer. It all began with a trip to California. Ronald was traveling with the Chicago Cubs during their spring training. For years, he had dreamed of becoming an actor, but it had always seemed so far away. This trip felt different. It was as if fate was giving him a chance. While in Los Angeles, a friend arranged for Ronald to meet a talent agent. The agent was immediately impressed. Ronald was tall, handsome, and confident. His warm, friendly smile made people feel at ease. "You've got something special," the agent said. Ronald didn't know it yet, but this meeting would change his life. The agent arranged for Ronald to take a screen test at Warner Brothers Studios. A screen test was like an audition, a chance for the studio to see if someone had the right look and personality for the big screen. Ronald had never acted in a movie before, but he wasn't nervous. He relied on the same charm and storytelling skills that had made him a star on the radio. A few weeks later, the studio called with amazing news. Ronald had passed the screen test. Warner Brothers offered him a 7-year contract. It was a dream come true. With this contract, Ronald Reagan became a Hollywood actor. His first roles were small. He appeared in movies like Love is on the Air, 1937, playing a radio announcer. It was a fitting start for someone who had just come from radio. Ronald worked hard to learn everything he could about acting. He studied his lines, listened to directors, and watched other actors closely. He wanted to be the best he could be. Over time, Ronald's roles grew larger. He played a variety of characters, from cowboys to soldiers. His charm and good looks made him popular with audiences. By the early 1940s, Ronald had starred in films like Knut Rockne, All-American, 1940, where he played George Gipp, a college football player. In one memorable scene, Ronald's character says, "Win just one for the Gipper." That line became famous and would stay with him for the rest of his life. But Hollywood wasn't always easy. The movie business was fast-paced and competitive. Actors were expected to work long hours and follow the studio's rules. Ronald sometimes felt like he was just another face in the crowd. He wanted to do more than just look good on screen. He wanted his roles to have meaning. Still, he stayed optimistic. He believed that hard work would lead to better opportunities. In 1942, the United States entered World War II. Like many young men of his generation, Ronald wanted to serve his country. He joined the U.S. Army Air Forces, but instead of going to the battlefield, he was assigned to make training films for soldiers. Ronald's acting skills were put to good use, and he was proud to contribute in this way. Though he wasn't fighting on the front lines, he felt he was helping the war effort. After the war, Ronald returned to Hollywood. He picked up where he left off, acting in films and building his career. But something had changed. The war had made him think about life in a deeper way. He started to wonder if acting was enough. Could he use his talents to do something more meaningful? Around this time, Ronald met someone who would change his life forever. Nancy Davis. Nancy was a young actress, smart and elegant. The two quickly became close. Nancy saw something in Ronald that others didn't always see. She saw his potential to be a leader. The two fell deeply in love and married in 1952. Nancy became not just Ronald's wife, but his partner and greatest supporter. By the 1950s, Ronald's acting career began to slow down. He appeared in fewer films, and the roles were not as exciting as they had been before. Hollywood was changing, and Ronald was no longer a top star. But instead of feeling defeated, he looked for new opportunities. In 1954, he found one. Ronald became the host of General Electric Theater, a popular television program. Every week, he introduced stories to millions of viewers. It was a perfect fit for him. His warm voice and friendly presence made people feel connected to him. Through this show, Ronald reached more Americans than ever before. During this time, Ronald also began speaking at events, sharing his thoughts on politics and the future of the country. He discovered a new passion, public speaking. He had a natural ability to inspire and connect with audiences. His speeches were full of hope and optimism. People loved listening to him. But Hollywood, for all its glamour, had its challenges. Ronald saw friends struggle with the pressures of fame. He watched as political tensions rose in the film industry during the Cold War. He even faced criticism for his own views. Still, he stayed true to himself. He believed in honesty, hard work, and the American dream. As the years went on, Ronald realized something important. Acting had given him a platform, but it wasn't his final destination. He had learned how to communicate, how to lead, and how to inspire. He had gained skills that could take him beyond the silver screen. Hollywood had opened the door to a new chapter in his life. What would come next? Ronald didn't know yet, but he was ready to find out. His time in movies had prepared him for a bigger stage, one where he could make an even greater difference. Chapter 5. A Man in Uniform. In 1941, the world was at war. World War II had spread across Europe and Asia, and millions of lives were at risk. The United States tried to stay out of the conflict, but everything changed on December 7th, 1941. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The next day, America declared war. The nation was now part of the fight. For Ronald Reagan, like many young men in America, this was a call to action. He loved his country and wanted to do his part. At the time, he was building a successful career in Hollywood, starring in movies and becoming a recognizable face. But Ronald knew that fame wasn't important now. What mattered was serving his country. Ronald signed up for the U.S. Army in April 1942. He was eager to help in any way he could. However, there was a challenge. Ronald had poor eyesight. Without his glasses, he couldn't see well enough to safely fight on the battlefield. This meant he couldn't join the combat units. Instead, the Army found another way for him to serve. Because of his background in Hollywood, Ronald was assigned to the 1st Motion Picture Unit. This special team made training films for soldiers. These films taught important skills like flying airplanes, handling weapons, and staying safe in combat. At first, Ronald was disappointed that he couldn't fight alongside other soldiers. But soon, he realized how important this work was. These films saved lives by preparing soldiers for the challenges of war. The unit was based in Culver City, California, near the heart of Hollywood. Ronald and his team worked long hours to create the films. He acted in many of them, but he also helped write scripts and direct. It was hard work, but it felt meaningful. He believed in what he was doing. One of the most memorable films Ronald worked on was called Recognition of the Japanese Zero. It taught pilots how to recognize enemy planes in the sky. These lessons were critical in battle. Ronald was proud to know that his work made a difference. While he was making films, Ronald stayed in touch with friends who were fighting overseas. He wrote letters and sent words of encouragement. He also supported programs to help soldiers and their families. Even though he wasn't on the front lines, he felt connected to the war effort. The war years were a time of sacrifice for everyone. Ronald saw how families across America came together to support each other. People rationed food, collected metal for weapons, and worked in factories to produce supplies for the military. These acts of unity inspired Ronald. He believed in the strength of the American people. This belief would stay with him for the rest of his life. During this time, Ronald's sense of duty deepened. He realized how important it was to fight for freedom and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He also gained a greater appreciation for the men and women who served in the military. Their bravery and sacrifices left a lasting impression on him. The war ended in 1945. Millions of lives had been lost, but the Allies were victorious. When the soldiers returned home, there was joy and relief, but also sadness for those who didn't make it back. Ronald reflected on the impact of the war. He had seen how it brought out both the best and worst in humanity. He felt grateful for the chance to serve, even in a small way. Ronald left the Army in 1945 with the rank of captain. He returned to Hollywood to continue his acting career. But he was not the same man he had been before the war. His time in uniform had changed him. He had learned about sacrifice, leadership, and the power of unity. He felt a deeper connection to his country and its values. One experience stood out in his mind. Near the end of the war, Ronald visited a veterans hospital. He saw young soldiers who had been injured in battle. Many of them were just a few years younger than he was. Some had lost arms or legs. Others carried emotional scars. Ronald sat with them, listened to their stories, and tried to offer comfort. He never forgot their courage. After the war, Ronald carried this sense of duty into everything he did. He knew he had been given an opportunity to live a full life, and he wanted to make the most of it. The war had shown him what really mattered: serving others, standing up for what was right, and working to make the world a better place. Ronald's years in the Army weren't glamorous. He didn't fight in battles or win medals for bravery, but his contributions were valuable in their own way. The training films he helped create prepared soldiers for the challenges of war. His work saved lives and supported the larger effort. He was proud to have served. As he returned to civilian life, Ronald wondered what the future held. Hollywood was waiting, but he felt there was something more out there for him. His time in uniform had taught him that one person could make a difference. It had given him a sense of purpose that would guide him in the years ahead. What would Ronald do with this new sense of duty and love for his country? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain. He was ready for the next chapter. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Turning Point. Hollywood was a place of bright lights and big dreams, but for Ronald Reagan, it was also a place of challenges. By the 1950s, his acting career was slowing down. He wasn't getting the leading roles he once had, and the film industry was changing. At the same time, the Cold War was creating tension in America. Fear of communism had gripped the nation, and Hollywood was at the center of it. Ronald had always believed in freedom and democracy. During this time, he became more involved in politics. He spoke out against communism and defended the rights of individuals. These were tough years for Hollywood, with actors and writers being accused of political crimes. Ronald worked to protect his colleagues while staying true to his beliefs. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Amid this turmoil, something wonderful happened. In 1951, Ronald met Nancy Davis. Nancy was a young actress just starting her career. She was intelligent, graceful, and kind. She had heard that her name was mistakenly included on a list of suspected communist supporters. Worried, she asked Ronald, who was then the president of the Screen Actors Guild, for help. Ronald looked into the matter and quickly cleared her name. Their first meeting was professional, but there was a spark. Ronald and Nancy began to see each other more often. They went to dinners, shared long conversations, and discovered how much they had in common. Nancy admired Ronald's strength and dedication to his values. Ronald was drawn to Nancy's warmth and loyalty. He once said, "Whatever it is that makes a man love a woman, she had it." In 1952, Ronald and Nancy were married. Their wedding was small and simple, attended by close friends and family. From that day forward, Nancy became more than just Ronald's wife. She became his partner in every sense of the word. She supported him in his career, stood by him in tough times, and encouraged him to follow his dreams. Life as a married couple wasn't always easy. Hollywood could be a harsh place, full of competition and pressure. Ronald still struggled to find meaningful roles, and the film industry was unpredictable. But Nancy believed in him. She reminded him of his talents and the impact he could have on people. Her love gave him strength when he doubted himself. Nancy also brought stability to Ronald's life. She understood him deeply and helped him focus on what truly mattered. Together, they built a loving home and started a family. They had 2 children, Patty and Ron Jr., who brought joy and laughter into their lives. During these years, Ronald continued to explore his interest in politics. He started giving speeches at events, sharing his thoughts on America's future. His words were full of optimism and hope. People loved his ability to connect with them. They felt he understood their struggles and dreams. Nancy encouraged him to speak more, knowing it was something he truly cared about. The turning point came in 1962. Ronald made a decision that would change his life forever. He left the Democratic Party, which he had supported for years, and became a Republican. This was a big step, but Ronald believed it was the right one. He felt the country needed strong leadership and new ideas. His speeches became more focused on issues like freedom, smaller government, and economic opportunity. Through all of this, Nancy was by his side. She helped him refine his ideas and practice his speeches. She listened, advised, and cheered him on. Ronald often said that Nancy was his rock and his closest confidant. Their partnership became the foundation for everything he achieved. One of the most emotional moments in their journey came in 1964. Ronald delivered a speech called A Time for Choosing. It was broadcast on national television in support of a Republican candidate for president. In the speech, Ronald talked about the importance of freedom, responsibility, and the American dream. His words were powerful and inspiring. Millions of people watched, and many were moved to tears. That speech changed Ronald's life. It launched him into the political spotlight and showed the world his potential as a leader. Nancy watched proudly as her husband found his voice and his purpose. She knew this was just the beginning. For Ronald, the years in Hollywood had been a time of growth and discovery. He had learned how to communicate, how to connect with people, and how to face challenges with courage. But most importantly, Hollywood had brought him Nancy. Her love and support had given him the strength to follow a new path. As the chapter of his life in Hollywood came to a close, Ronald was ready for a new challenge. Could this former actor turn his passion for politics into a career? With Nancy by his side, he believed anything was possible. Together, they were about to take the next step in their incredible journey. Chapter 7. A New Passion. Politics. By the 1950s and early 1960s, Ronald Reagan's acting career was slowing down. The roles that once came so easily were now harder to find. The golden age of Hollywood was changing, and Ronald realized that his future might lie somewhere else. But where? He didn't know yet. What he did know was that he had something important to say. Ronald had always been interested in politics. He loved America and believed in its values: freedom, opportunity, and hard work. Over the years, he had grown concerned about the direction the country was taking. Taxes were rising. Government was growing. People were losing faith in the American dream. These issues sparked something inside him. He felt he needed to speak out. In the early 1960s, Ronald began giving speeches. At first, these were small events, often for organizations like the General Electric Company, where he had been a television host. He spoke about his concerns for the country and his belief in individual freedom. People listened. They liked his calm, clear voice and his hopeful vision. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He was becoming a leader. One of Ronald's biggest decisions came in 1962. He switched political parties, leaving the Democrats and joining the Republicans. This was a big step, and not everyone understood it. Some of his friends questioned his choice. But Ronald believed he was doing the right thing. He said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The party left me." In 1964, Ronald was asked to give a speech for Barry Goldwater, the Republican candidate for president. It was called A Time for Choosing. The speech aired on national television and became a defining moment in Ronald's life. His words were passionate and full of hope. He talked about the importance of freedom and the dangers of too much government control. "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny," he said. Millions of people watched and listened. Many were inspired. The speech changed everything. It made Ronald Reagan a national figure almost overnight. People began to see him as more than an actor or a speaker. They saw him as a leader. Letters poured in, urging him to run for office. At first, Ronald wasn't sure. He loved giving speeches, but could he really succeed in politics? It was a big decision, one that would affect not just him, but his family. Nancy, his wife, was by his side. She believed in him completely. She saw his passion and his ability to connect with people. Nancy encouraged him to follow his heart. She reminded him that he had always dreamed of making a difference. Together, they decided to take the next step. In 1966, Ronald announced that he was running for governor of California. It was a bold move. Some people laughed at the idea of an actor running for such an important position. They called him just a Hollywood star and said he wasn't serious. But Ronald didn't let the criticism stop him. He was focused on the issues that mattered to Californians: lowering taxes, improving education, and reducing crime. He worked hard to earn the trust of voters. The campaign was tough. Ronald traveled across the state, giving speeches and meeting people. He listened to their concerns and shared his vision for a better future. His message was simple but powerful. Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. His words resonated with many people who felt frustrated with the system. On election night, the results came in. Ronald Reagan had won. He was now the governor of California. For Ronald, this was a moment of great pride. He had taken a leap of faith and succeeded. But it was also the beginning of a new challenge. Leading the largest state in the country would not be easy. As governor, Ronald faced many tough decisions. California was dealing with protests, budget problems, and social unrest. Some people doubted his ability to handle these issues, but Ronald surprised them. He approached problems with calm determination. He listened to experts, asked questions, and made thoughtful decisions. His experience as an actor had taught him how to stay cool under pressure, and now that skill was helping him as a leader. One of Ronald's greatest strengths was his ability to inspire. He believed in the goodness of the American people and their ability to overcome challenges. he often said, "There are no easy answers, but there are simple answers." His optimism gave people hope, even in difficult times. Through it all, Nancy was by his side. She attended meetings, offered advice, and kept him grounded. Ronald often said that he couldn't have done it without her. Their partnership was the foundation of his success. As his time as governor continued, Ronald began to think about the future. He loved serving the people of California, but he also saw problems across the entire country. The economy was struggling. International tensions were rising. Ronald believed America needed strong leadership. He started to wonder, could he make an even bigger difference? By the time Ronald finished his second term as governor in 1975, he had become one of the most popular leaders in the country. He had shown that he was more than just an actor. He was a man of principle, with a vision for America's future. Politics had become Ronald's new passion. It gave him a purpose and a way to make a difference. But his journey was far from over. He had new challenges to face and bigger dreams to pursue. Could this former actor take his leadership to the highest level? The answer was still ahead. Chapter 8. Governor Reagan. In 1966, Ronald Reagan shocked many people. The former actor announced he was running for governor of California. Critics laughed. Some said, "What does an actor know about politics?" But Ronald didn't listen. He believed he had something important to offer. California was facing big challenges. The state's budget was out of control, and there was unrest on college campuses. Many people were frustrated with the government. Ronald spoke directly to their concerns. He promised to bring order, balance the budget, and make government work for the people. His campaign was energetic and hopeful. Ronald traveled all over California, shaking hands and giving speeches. He listened to voters' worries and shared his vision for a better future. He had a way of making people feel heard. "I'm not a politician," he said. "I'm a citizen who wants to make a difference." His words resonated with people who were tired of traditional politics. On election night, the results were clear. Ronald Reagan had won by a landslide. It was a victory that surprised even his biggest supporters. The former actor was now the governor of California. But winning the election was only the beginning. The real work was about to start. As governor, Ronald faced many challenges. California's budget was his first priority. The state was spending more money than it was earning. This couldn't continue. Ronald made tough decisions to cut costs. Some people criticized him, but he stayed firm. "We can't spend money we don't have," he said. Slowly, the state's finances improved. Another challenge came from college campuses. During the 1960s, many young people protested against the Vietnam War and other issues. Some protests turned violent, and campuses like the University of California at Berkeley became centers of conflict. As governor, Ronald had to find a way to restore peace while respecting free speech. It wasn't easy, but he remained calm under pressure. One famous moment came during a student protest. A reporter asked Ronald how he planned to deal with the situation. He responded, "If it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with." His words shocked many, but they also showed his determination to restore order. Critics called him harsh, but his supporters admired his toughness. Ronald's leadership style was straightforward. He believed in common sense and personal responsibility. He often said, "Government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives." These ideas guided his decisions as governor. Despite the challenges, Ronald also had many successes. He worked to make California's government more efficient. He supported projects to improve highways and schools. He also fought to reduce taxes, believing that people should keep more of the money they earned. His efforts earned him respect from both sides of the political aisle. Throughout his time as governor, Nancy was by his side. She attended events, offered advice, and provided emotional support. Ronald often said he couldn't have done it without her. Together, they navigated the pressures of public life. Their partnership became even stronger during these years. One of the most memorable moments of Ronald's time as governor came in 1971, during his second term. California faced a serious environmental crisis. Oil spilled off the coast of Santa Barbara, damaging the ocean and killing wildlife. Ronald acted quickly, working with experts to clean up the disaster and prevent future spills. His response showed his ability to handle unexpected challenges. By the time Ronald finished his second term in 1975, he had transformed California. He had balanced the budget, reduced taxes, and restored order. He had proven himself as a leader. But his time as governor wasn't just about policy. It was also about learning. Ronald had discovered his strengths and sharpened his vision for the future. As he prepared to leave office, many wondered what was next for Ronald Reagan. He had become one of the most popular governors in the country. Some people even suggested he should run for president. But Ronald wasn't sure. He wanted to spend time with Nancy and reflect on what he had achieved. Ronald's years as governor were a turning point. They showed him that leadership was about more than making speeches or giving orders. It was about listening, learning, and staying true to your values. He had grown from a Hollywood actor into a respected statesman. And he wasn't done yet. What would Ronald's next chapter hold? The answer would take him to the highest office in the land. But for now, he looked back on his time as governor with pride and gratitude. He had faced tough challenges and made difficult decisions. And through it all, he had never lost sight of his goal: to make a difference. Chapter 9. The Road to the White House. When Ronald Reagan left the governor's office in 1975, many people wondered, what's next? He had been a popular and effective leader in California, but could he go further? Ronald began to ask himself the same question. He loved his country and believed it needed strong leadership. The idea of running for president grew in his mind. At the time, The United States was struggling. The economy was weak, inflation was high, and many Americans felt uncertain about the future. Internationally, the Cold War with the Soviet Union created tension. Ronald believed he had solutions. He wanted to bring back optimism, reduce government control, and strengthen the nation. But deciding to run for president was not easy. Ronald's first attempt came in 1976. He challenged Gerald Ford, the sitting president, for the Republican Party's nomination. This was a bold move. Many people thought it was impossible for him to win against a sitting president. But Ronald believed in himself and his ideas. He traveled across the country, giving speeches and meeting voters. His message of smaller government and individual freedom resonated with many. The campaign was tough. Ronald and Gerald Ford debated on national television. Ronald's calm and confident style impressed viewers. In one debate, he famously said, "I paid for this microphone," when interrupted, showing his strength and determination. Despite his efforts, Ronald narrowly lost the nomination to Ford. It was a disappointment, but he didn't give up. After the 1976 election, Ronald returned to California. He spent the next few years refining his ideas and staying connected with the public. He gave speeches, wrote articles, and met with leaders. He listened to people's concerns and worked on solutions. All the while, he kept the possibility of running for president again in his heart. By 1980, Ronald was ready. He announced his candidacy for president with a message of hope and renewal. He said, "America's best days are yet to come." His words inspired people who were tired of feeling discouraged. Ronald's campaign focused on reducing taxes, strengthening the economy, and restoring pride in America. He believed in the power of the American people to overcome any challenge. The campaign wasn't easy. Ronald faced doubts and criticism. Some called him too old or said his ideas were unrealistic, but he didn't let this discourage him. He stayed focused and optimistic, always looking forward. Nancy, his wife, was his greatest supporter. She traveled with him, cheered him on, and gave him strength during difficult moments. The Republican primaries were the first test. Ronald faced tough opponents, including George H.W. Bush, a former congressman and diplomat. The race was competitive, with many debates and campaign events. Ronald's experience and vision helped him stand out. He eventually won the Republican nomination and chose George Bush as his running mate. The final challenge was the general election against Jimmy Carter, the Democratic president at the time. The election took place during a period of crisis. The economy was weak, and international issues, like the Iran hostage crisis, worried many Americans. Ronald focused on these problems in his speeches. He asked voters, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" The question made people think and earned him support. One of the most memorable moments of the campaign came during the presidential debate. Ronald's opponent criticized his policies, but Ronald remained calm and cheerful. He smiled and said, "There you go again," diffusing the tension with humor. His optimism and confidence won over many viewers. It was a turning point. Election Day arrived on November 4th, 1980. Millions of Americans went to the polls. When the votes were counted, the results were clear. Ronald Reagan had won by a landslide. He carried 44 states and earned over 50% of the popular vote. It was a historic victory. For Ronald, the moment was overwhelming. He thought about his journey, from a small-town boy in Illinois to an actor, governor, and now president-elect. He felt deeply honored and humbled by the trust Americans had placed in him. Nancy stood by his side, beaming with pride. The road to the White House had been long and challenging. Ronald faced doubts, criticism, and setbacks, but he never gave up. He believed in his vision and in the American people. His determination and optimism had carried him to the highest office in the land. As Ronald prepared to take the oath of office, he knew his real work was just beginning. The challenges ahead were great, but he was ready. He believed that with hard work, courage, and faith, America could achieve anything. Chapter 10. A President for the People. On January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan stood on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. The air was cold, but the atmosphere was filled with hope. As he placed his hand on the Bible and took the oath of office, he became the 40th President of the United States. It was a moment of pride, not just for Ronald, but for the millions of Americans who believed in his vision for the country. The challenges Ronald faced as president were enormous. The economy was in trouble. Inflation was high. Unemployment was rising. And many families were struggling to make ends meet. Internationally, the Cold War with the Soviet Union created fear and uncertainty. But Ronald was not discouraged. He believed in the strength of the American people. "It's morning again in America," he said, promising a fresh start. One of Ronald's first goals was to fix the economy. He introduced a bold plan that became known as Reaganomics. It focused on lowering taxes, reducing government spending, and encouraging businesses to grow. Critics were skeptical. Some thought his ideas wouldn't work, but Ronald remained confident. He believed that by giving people more control over their money, the economy would improve. It wasn't easy. The early years of his presidency were tough. Unemployment rose, and some Americans lost hope. But Ronald stayed optimistic. He spoke directly to the people, explaining his policies and asking for their patience. Slowly, the economy began to recover. Inflation dropped, businesses expanded, and jobs returned. By the mid-1980s, the United States was experiencing a period of economic growth. Many credited Ronald's leadership for the turnaround. While he worked to fix the economy, Ronald also focused on international issues. The Cold War with the Soviet Union had lasted for decades, creating tension and fear. Both nations had powerful nuclear weapons, and the world worried about the possibility of war. Ronald believed the United States needed to show strength. He increased military spending and introduced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a program aimed at protecting the U.S. from missile attacks. Some called it Star Wars and said it was unrealistic. But Ronald believed it was necessary to keep the country safe. At the same time, Ronald wanted peace. He built a relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union. The two men were very different, but they shared a desire to end the Cold War. They held several meetings, where they discussed reducing nuclear weapons and improving relations between their countries. These talks were difficult, but they made progress. In 1987, Ronald and Gorbachev signed a historic treaty to eliminate certain types of nuclear missiles. It was a step toward a safer world. Ronald's presidency was also marked by tragedy. On March 30th, 1981, just 2 months after taking office, an assassin tried to take his life. Ronald was leaving a hotel in Washington, D.C. when shots were fired. A bullet struck him in the chest. He was rushed to the hospital, weak but still conscious. As doctors prepared for surgery, Ronald joked, "I hope you're all Republicans." His humor and courage in such a frightening moment inspired the nation. Thankfully, Ronald recovered. The assassination attempt brought him even closer to the American people. They admired his bravery and strength. Ronald used the experience to reaffirm his commitment to serve. "Whatever time I have left," he said, "belongs to you." One of Ronald's greatest strengths as president was his ability to communicate. He earned the nickname the Great Communicator because of his skill in speaking to the public. Whether it was a televised speech or a simple joke, he had a way of connecting with people. He made complex issues easy to understand and filled his words with optimism. Americans felt like he truly cared about them. One of Ronald's most famous moments came in 1987 at the Berlin Wall. The wall divided East and West Berlin, symbolizing the division between communism and freedom. Standing in front of the wall, Ronald addressed the Soviet leader directly. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," he declared. His words echoed around the world. 2 years later, the Berlin Wall fell, marking the beginning of the end for the Cold War. Ronald's presidency wasn't without challenges. Some criticized his policies, saying they benefited the wealthy more than the poor. Others disagreed with his military spending. But Ronald focused on the bigger picture. He believed his actions would create a stronger and freer America. By the end of his presidency in 1989, Ronald Reagan had become one of the most popular presidents in American history. The economy was stronger. The Cold War was nearing its end, and the country felt more hopeful. Ronald had delivered on his promise of morning again in America. As Ronald and Nancy left the White House, they looked back with pride. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. Ronald often said he couldn't have done it without Nancy. Her love and support had been his greatest strength. Ronald's time as president changed the world. His leadership, optimism, and belief in freedom inspired millions. Even after leaving office, his words and actions continued to guide America. "It's morning again in America." Those words captured the spirit of Ronald Reagan's presidency, a spirit of hope, determination, and belief in the power of the American people. Chapter 11. The Crisis and the Comeback. On March 30th, 1981, just 69 days into Ronald Reagan's presidency, the unthinkable happened. Ronald was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel after giving a speech. It was a typical day, full of meetings and public events. As he walked toward his car, surrounded by Secret Service agents, a man in the crowd pulled out a gun. Shots rang out. The scene was chaotic. People screamed and ducked for cover. Secret Service agents jumped into action, shielding Ronald and tackling the shooter. In the confusion, no one immediately realized that Ronald had been hit. A bullet had ricocheted off the car and struck him in the chest, just inches from his heart. Ronald was rushed to George Washington University Hospital. Despite the pain, he tried to stay calm. Inside the car, he joked with the agents, "I guess I forgot to duck." Even as he struggled to breathe, Ronald's sense of humor remained intact. His strength in such a terrifying moment was remarkable. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to save his life. The bullet had punctured one of his lungs, and he was losing blood. As they prepared for surgery, Ronald looked at the medical team and quipped, "Please tell me you're all Republicans." Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. It was a small moment, but it showed Ronald's courage and character. Nancy Reagan rushed to the hospital as soon as she heard the news. She was terrified, but tried to stay strong for Ronald. When she saw him before surgery, he smiled at her and whispered, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Those words brought tears to her eyes. She held his hand tightly, praying he would pull through. The surgery was a success. Doctors removed the bullet and stopped the bleeding, but the recovery would take time. Ronald stayed in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks, resting and regaining his strength. During this time, he received thousands of letters and messages from people all over the world. Americans of all ages sent cards, prayers, and words of encouragement. Ronald was deeply moved by the outpouring of support. "I feel as if I have a new connection with the people," he said. The assassination attempt changed Ronald. He later said it made him realize how precious life was and strengthened his faith in God. He believed he had been spared for a reason. "I know now that whatever time I have left belongs to Him," he said. This sense of purpose gave him even more determination to serve the country. Returning to work wasn't easy. Ronald was still weak and in pain, but he refused to let the attack define him. Just a few weeks after leaving the hospital, he appeared before Congress to deliver a speech about his economic plans. As he walked into the room, lawmakers from both parties stood and applauded. The moment was emotional. It showed the nation's respect and admiration for their president. Ronald's recovery became a symbol of resilience. His optimism and determination inspired Americans during a difficult time. People saw him as a leader who could face adversity and come back stronger. His approval ratings soared, and even some of his critics admired his bravery. But the crisis didn't end there. The assassination attempt raised questions about security and mental health. The shooter, John Hinckley Jr., was a troubled man who later claimed he had acted to impress an actress. The event led to changes in how presidents were protected. It also sparked discussions about mental health care in America. For Ronald, the experience deepened his connection with the American people. He often spoke about the unity he felt during those weeks. "We are all Americans," he said. "When we stand together, there is nothing we cannot achieve." His words brought comfort to a nation still reeling from the attack. The comeback was complete when Ronald returned to his full schedule. He worked tirelessly to address the country's challenges, from economic issues to international tensions. Despite the physical and emotional toll of the shooting, Ronald remained focused on his goals. His courage and resilience became part of his legacy. The assassination attempt was one of the most dramatic moments of Ronald Reagan's presidency. It tested him in ways he never expected. But instead of breaking him, it made him stronger. He faced the crisis with grace, humor, and determination, showing the world what true leadership looked like. Through it all, Nancy was his greatest support. She stayed by his side, helping him recover and reminding him of his strength. Their bond grew even deeper during this time, becoming a source of inspiration for many. Ronald's comeback wasn't just about his recovery. It was about his ability to lead with hope and optimism, even in the face of danger. It reminded the nation that challenges could be overcome, no matter how great they seemed. The crisis had shaken America, but it also brought people together. And in Ronald Reagan, they saw a president who could rise above fear and lead with courage. His journey from crisis to comeback was a testament to his character and his unwavering belief in the American spirit. Chapter 12. The Legacy of a Leader. Ronald Reagan left the White House in January 1989. After 8 years as president, his time in office had come to an end. But his influence on America and the world was far from over. As he waved goodbye to the crowds in Washington, he looked back on a journey filled with challenges, victories, and unforgettable moments. Ronald's presidency had changed the course of history. At home, he brought hope during difficult times. The economy had been struggling when he took office. Through his policies, known as Reaganomics, he reduced taxes and encouraged businesses to grow. While not everyone agreed with his methods, his leadership helped create jobs and restore confidence in the economy. By the end of his presidency, America's economy was stronger than when he began. Internationally, Ronald played a key role in ending the Cold War. For decades, the United States and the Soviet Union had been locked in a tense and dangerous conflict. Many feared nuclear war. Ronald believed that peace could only come through strength. He built up the U.S. military while also working to find common ground with Soviet leaders. His relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was one of the most important parts of his presidency. At first, the two men seemed like opposites. But through meetings and discussions, they built trust. In 1987, they signed a treaty to reduce nuclear weapons, the first of its kind. Just a few years later, the Berlin Wall fell, marking the end of the Cold War. Many credited Ronald's leadership for helping to bring about this historic change. Ronald's ability to inspire was one of his greatest strengths. He believed in the American people and their potential. His speeches were full of hope and optimism. Phrases like, "It's morning again in America," reminded people that brighter days were ahead. He earned the nickname the Great Communicator because of his ability to connect with people through his words. But Ronald's legacy was not without challenges. Some criticized his policies, saying they benefited the wealthy more than the poor. Others pointed to increased national debt during his presidency. Yet, even his critics recognized his strong leadership and his commitment to his vision. After leaving office, Ronald and Nancy returned to their home in California. They looked forward to spending time together away from the public eye. Ronald enjoyed horseback riding, writing in his diary, and reflecting on his years of service. But he also stayed involved in public life, giving speeches and supporting causes he believed in. In 1994, Ronald shared difficult news with the world. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a condition that affects memory and the ability to think clearly. In a heartfelt letter, he wrote, "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life." The letter touched millions of people. Even in the face of illness, Ronald showed courage and grace. Nancy became his primary caregiver, standing by his side as she always had. Their love and partnership remained strong during this difficult time. The nation watched as they faced the challenges of Alzheimer's with dignity and strength. Ronald's bravery in sharing his diagnosis helped raise awareness about the disease. Ronald Reagan passed away on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93. The news brought sadness across the nation and the world. Tributes poured in from leaders and citizens alike, honoring his legacy. Flags were lowered to half-staff, and people gathered to remember his life and achievements. His funeral was attended by world leaders, former presidents, and countless Americans who admired him. In his eulogy, George H.W. Bush, his vice president, said, "Ronald Reagan believed in America. He believed in her people. And he inspired us to believe in ourselves." Today, Ronald Reagan is remembered as one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century. His belief in freedom, his optimism, and his ability to lead during challenging times left a lasting impact. He reminded people that with hope and determination, anything is possible. Ronald's legacy lives on in many ways. Schools, airports, and buildings have been named in his honor. His presidential library in California welcomes visitors from around the world, sharing his story and preserving his memory. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the hope he gave to millions of people. Ronald Reagan's journey was one of courage, faith, and love for his country. From his humble beginnings in a small town in Illinois to the world stage as president, He showed what one person can achieve with determination and belief in a better future. As he once said, "There are no limits to growth and human progress when men and women are free to follow their dreams." His life was proof of those words.